Hello, everybody. We're going to do a debriefing on public session, on 3 shorts public session. But before we actually proceed to analysis of the performance of the 3 teams in this session, we would like to remind you the Hall of Fame on the Alpha 5 synthetic acids. As you can see, the leader is 70% to the reference field development plan. And the next one is 67%, 64%. And basically, it's all excellent results. If you look at the table to the right, which shows the explanation of the test results, the percentages, and how do they relate to the verbal description of your success, everything which is more than 75% is outstanding. Nobody has managed to achieve that with the Alpha 5 so far, although Alpha 5 has been more than a year been released more than a year ago, and probably hundreds of different sessions and teams were trying to show their best at this asset. But there are a few teams who managed to get the excellent results. This is Gazprom Neft and Safoil, the joint team from different assets. The good performance is something between 55 and 65. As you can see, one of the other Gazprom Neft assets came very close to that. And 45 to 55% is considered to be fair. The majority of the companies normally perform within this range. And everything which is below 45% is considered to be poor. And let's proceed to the next slide. And here is the results of the 3 teams, which is Estonian, Cryogenian, and Ordovician. And as you can see, the first 2 teams, Estonian and Cryogenian, they managed to get 53 and 52%, which is a good result. And Ordovician is a 38. Can you come back to the previous slide, please? It's not a good result, it's a fair result. 52 and 53, but it's very close to good. As you can see from the table to the right, 52, 53 are very close to 55%, which breaks. But obviously, the border between good and fair is very blurred. So it's not like it's a stepwise function. So 52, 53 is still good. Can you go to the next slide, please? Well, the 38% is somewhere in between of the poor region. Can you go back to the previous slide? 38%, yeah, it's between 35 and 48, so it's in the heart, in the center point of the poor performance. Just for your information, the majority of the professional oil teams, they perform around fair, and very few in good range, very few in poor range. But the very poor results or failures are normally the novices who just make the first steps in holistic well and reservoir management and field development planning, or don't have enough competence on board to perform at a fair range, in a fair range. Let's go next. So this is the team number 3 is in a fair range, which is okay. And as you can see at the bottom line of this table, there is a reference scenario which is taken as 100%, and each and every team is being measured against the reference in percentage. And also there are 2 additional scenarios, which is called booster and NFA. The NFA is very easy to explain. It's just if you keep all the cash in the bank, which was available at the beginning of the tournament, and you just don't spend it, and you just produce the wells as it is, then eventually you're going to get with 25% net profit value from what is done by the reference. So reference is basically managed to produce 4 times higher profit, discounted profit, than no further activities. As for the booster plan improves the NFA just a little, from 25 to 29, just additional 4%. And the booster plan assumes that you don't need to be an experienced reservoir engineer. You just spend all the money on drilling producers. You drill producers right in the crystal area of the field. You don't spend money on pressure maintenance. Whatever is left from the drilling, you do spend on workovers, but only producers for the water shutoffs. And the booster also means that you keep the bottom hole at producers as low as possible, and in injectors as high as possible. That's why it's called booster. But the complexity of the asset of this particular case, synthetic case, is quite high. So running the booster plan doesn't help a lot to improve your performance above the no further activities. And that's the whole learning point of that case. So each and every team which is trying to show its best in Alpha 5, it should come up with something more sophisticated than just a booster. Obviously, reaching out to reference is very difficult, or nearly impossible. But as I showed in the previous slides, reaching somewhere around 70–75% is quite doable, and it's been done. So let's proceed into the consolidated activity statistics. It consists of 3 chapters, all of them, having the table format. The first chapter is the budget strategy. The second chapter is the production strategy, and the third chapter is the pressure maintenance strategy. So we're going to start with the budget strategy. As I already mentioned, the first line of the table and the key metric of success is the net present value, which is a discounted profit. And the discounted rate in this particular case was around, as far as I remember, something between 10 to 15%. It's been clearly mentioned in the field review. To be honest with you, I don't remember which one, but I do remember it's between 10 to 15%. And in terms of the production, how much oil the team has managed to produce in respect to the reference, as you can see, the numbers are quite different. It's 48 to Tonian, it's 47 Cryogenian, and 37 to Ordovician. This line is important in many other cases, not in these particular cases. It's quite in line with the NPV, but in many cases, the oil production performance can be different to the NPV performance. Normally, it happens when the team generates the oil, mostly produce oil at a later time, in the third shot or fourth shot or the fifth shot. This one is a demo, just 3 shot session, but there are sessions with 5 shots, with 7 shots, with 10 shots, and the more oil you produce later in time, the more it discounted as a cash. So some teams, they perform really good in terms of the oil production, but in terms of the NPV, they set back. Well, in this case, we didn't have a lot of shots, just 3 of them, and their oil production was quite in line with the NPV, or vice versa, basically. The other line is the way the NPV has been generated in respect to every cash unit available in hand. Because the concept of the annual budget is that you have a flat budget available on every year, plus you have some additional budget which is proportional to the previous year profit, cash profit. So basically, the more you produce in the previous shot, the more cash you have available in the next shot. And many teams, they complain that they didn't have enough cash comparing to the other teams. So this metric comes very handy to explain the efficiency of the budget spending. And as you can see from this line, again, we don't see much of the difference between the efficiency of the cash spending and they're well correlated with the NPV. The Tonian showed the best budget spending efficiency, 5.8. The Cryogenian showed 5.7, and the Ordovician showed only 4 cash unit profit, discounted cash unit profit on every cash unit spent. And this is less than 50% of what can be done in terms of the reference scenario. Again, this line, although in this particular case is showing the same rating as the NPV and oil production, but in many other CAS scenarios, it can show a different performance of the teams in terms of the budget efficiency. The next line is the oil recovery factor. And this is the first time we see a contradiction in the results, because Tonian won over the Cryogenian in terms of the net profit value, 53% against 52%, but it lost in terms of the oil recovery factor by having 39% at the end of the production cycle of that field against almost 41% of Cryogenian, which means that Cryogenian strategy was not the best efficient in terms of the short-term 3 years strategy, but in terms of the full life cycle of the field, it shows a better strategy than Tonian. As of Ordovician, the recovery factor is low, 34%. Then the total budget line is just for your information and doesn't really mean a lot in this particular case. And the budgeting of the producers, drilling new producers. Well, the Tonian spent 52% of the, almost 52.5% of their budget on drilling producers. The Cryogenian spent less money. And to be honest with you, the recommendation from reference was something in between, 47%. As for Ordovician, they spend a lot of cash. The lion's share of the budget was spent on the producer's drilling, and that probably was a mistake. The other line showing the budgeting of the injection drilling. As you can see that only Tonian spent 15% on the injection drilling, was not enough in terms of the reference, but at least better than what Cryogenian and Ordovician spent, which was 0. And it's very sad that those two teams, Cryogenian and Ordovician, did not budget their drilling new injectors. The other line showing the fracturing, and the reference scenario assumed 3% of the budget to be spent on fracturing, and the Tonian only spent 1% on this activity, which was quite low. The Cryogenian spent 2.4, and Ordovician spent about the same. So all of them spend less than it's been recommended, especially Tonian, but more or less fair. The next line is the budgeting on walkovers on producers. The reference scenario assumes only 6% budgeting on the walkovers because they plan to fix the deep water production in the wells which they inherited from the pre-tournament times, while Tonian, Cryogenian, and Ordovician most probably created a lot of behind casing challenges and spent more money on this, especially Tonian and Cryogenian. Surprised Ordovician didn't spend a lot on that. But let's see later on if they created some behind casing complications or not. That will be seen on the next chapter analysis. The next line is the budget for water walkovers, on injectors. Well, the reference plan assumed 17% of the budget should be spent on fixing the fifth injection in injectors which they inherited from the pre-tournament times, and Tonian spent very little on this, 7% only. Cryogenian even less, and Ordovician 7%. Cryogenian 2% is really surprising. Next line is showing the budgeting on the well testing on producers. The recommendation was to keep around 0.5% of the budget on formation pressure tests. Tonian didn't do this at all. The Cryogenian was spending some cash, and Ordovician was spending almost 1%. So both of them were spending a little bit higher than it's been recommended by the reference, but fair. What is not fair, and surprisingly not fair, is that Tonian didn't check formation pressure on producers at all. Then we go to the well testing on injectors, and the recommendation of the reference scenario was 0.3% budget on the pressure tests on injectors. And again, Tonian didn't check pressure at all. Actually, nobody was checking the pressure on injectors. That means that all three teams, they don't simply understand how the checking the formation pressure in injectors can bring value. The next line is production logging on producers. This is one of the most popular surveillance in the whole industry. And the reference plan recommended spending 2.3% of their budget on the production logging and producers. Antonian was spending 6.5, which is more than probably required. Cryogenian was spending 4.7, which is still a little bit higher than it is required. And Ordovician was doing 1.7%, which is less than recommended. And the next line is production logging on injectors. Well, reference scenario assumed that the most balanced number is 0.38, let's say 0.4%. The Tonian spent twice as much. The Cryogenian was not spending money at all. And Ordovician spent about the right number, right share of the budget on doing the production logging and injectors. So that will be all on the budgeting. And the extra session on that page is the drilling the new verticals and slanted wells. And I would say the recommendations on the reference was 4, and most of the teams, they did the right thing. The Tonian did 5 instead of 4, Ordovician did exactly 4, Cryogenian did less, but more or less it's okay. And among those which have been drilled, those with fracturing. Well, basically, the teams underestimated the efficiency of the fracturing of the new wells. The reference scenario assumed making fracs on all the new wells, while the team did only on one well. Drilling new horizontal wells. The reference plan suggested one well, and for this, the reference team, they identified, they localized the reserves, which they believe were staying in a low quality reservoir. And they drilled one horizontal well, and they did a multi-frac on it with the 3 stages. I can't say from here if Ordovician spotted the same area, but they did drill a new horizontal well with, but surprisingly, with only one fracture stage. Well, I think we've done on this page, and we can proceed into the production analysis. Thank you. On the production analysis, the reference scenario suggested drilling 4 producers. And the Tonian and Cryogenian did the same, and the Ordovician drilled 5 producers, 1 extra. Basically, sorry, the new producers line is not drilling. It's the new producers, which include new drillings, which is the next line, the new drillings. Can you show me the new drillings? So the reference scenario assumed 3 new newly drilled wells and one is conversion. The Tonian drilled 4 wells. The Cryogenian drilled 3 and then 1 converted. The one converted is in the South Dome. Probably, if you remember, the field consists of the 2 domes, the Northern Dome and the Southern Dome. And there's one well in the crestal area of the Southern Dome, which has been converted in the pre-tournament times into injector, and it was not a good idea. So some teams, when they start analyzing this, they realize that it was not a good idea and they converted back. So the reference scenario assumed that action. The Cryogenians, it looked like they spotted that mistake and did right action. As for Ordovician, they just drilled the 5 new wells, no conversions. The average initial oil production rate of newly drilled wells. You see the reference scenario looks somewhere around 117. Antonian did a good job. The newly drilled wells were producing the same amount of oil as the reference scenario. The Cryogenian did a little bit worse with 100 only. I cannot say from here what was the reason. Either the reservoir quality was lesser than Tonian and reference, or probably their drawdown, which they kept, were a little bit, smaller compared to Tonian reference. But the difference is not that big, 117, 100. But the Ordovician, they produced the new wells. They drilled 5 wells and they produced them with the 55 cubes per day only, which is very low, which is less than half of what is supposed to be produced. And the next line shows the cumulative effect of the oil production from all newly drilled wells. It's basically a product of the average initial oil production per well and on the number of newly drilled wells. And as you can see, the reference scenario has started the production in all the wells, new wells, with 466, Tonian with 468, which is good result. Cryogenian 300, which is less. That's because the initial rate was less and the number of wells was 3, not 4. And Ordovician, they produced 274, not far behind Cryogenian, but they had a lesser initial rate, but they drilled more wells. So the 275 is not far behind Cryogenian 300. Let's look into the cumulative oil production on new wells. Keep in mind that drilling new wells in good areas of the reservoir where the reserves are located, it's one thing, but maintaining production from the new wells is another thing. It depends on the quality of your care, about how many adjustments you do in terms of to follow the trend of the formation pressure. If it goes up, you go one, probably increase the production. If it goes down, probably decrease the production. So you have to take care about the production targets on the new wells, and obviously not only production targets, but also the workovers and the pressure maintenance. So basically, there's a lot of work around maintaining the production from the new wells. And as you can see from here, the reference cumulative is 413, while the Tonian did only 215. So they started production just like a reference with 467, but they managed only produce half from what the reference produced from these wells, because they didn't maintain the production from new wells properly. I cannot say here what was wrong, whether the pressure maintenance or the production targets were not efficient, but definitely it was 50% of the potential which has been achieved by the reference scenario. If we go to cryogenian, you can see that the cumulative production of cryogenian and Ordovician, both were almost the same and not far from the Tonian. And this is a very good result. And drilling new wells is one talent, but managing to produce cumulatively a good amount of oil from these wells is another talent. So if you look at the back into the line average initial oil production of the newly drilled well, then Tonian is a clear leader and more than twice ahead of Ordovician. But if you go to the cumulative oil production on new wells, you're going to see that the difference between Tonian, cryogenian, and Ordovician is not that much. Now, the next line is cumulative oil production from the old wells. And as you can see it here, again, there's no big difference between the three teams, with a clear winner of cryogenian, let's say 500, compared to the Tonian, and 455, and Ordovician 355. So in some areas, cryogenian managed to see the edge to the Tonian. But again, producing oil is one thing, but producing net profit value is another thing. It is very important to produce oil as soon as possible and not postpone the production to a later time, because net present value of the profit became the industry standard of the production efficiency. The next line is the producer's stimulation. Well, in this specific case, the reference scenario assumed one trial job in the first shot on the producer's simulation. They came up with the vision that it doesn't work, and they stopped doing that. Clearly, Tonian did the same, but cryogenian and Ordovician overestimated the efficiency of the stimulation and was spending some money on this. The next line is the producer's water shutoffs. Again, the reference scenario assumed only one water shutoffs from the pre-tournament time, while the Tonian and cryogenian and Ordovician were doing some jobs, most probably because the ultimate majority of the teams, not all the teams in the PetroCup world, during the first shot, they do break the cement and they cause more behind casing channels on producers. And obviously, once they see this, they start doing the water shutoffs. And that's why the Tonian, cryogenian, and Ordovician were doing more jobs than the reference. What I see is strange that Ordovicians were doing have done only 3 jobs. I believe they did more behind casing channels than just 3. The producers converted, well, we already discussed the strategy. Reference converted 1 well and cryogenian converted 1 well. That's Tonian and Ordovician focused on drillings. Producers' perforations. Reference scenario identified 10 opportunities to add perforations or reperforate the existing perfs. The Tonian did 7. Cryogenian did surprisingly 38. Probably many of them are not efficient. And Ordovician did not see this opportunity at all. The next line is the production adjustments. This is a very, very important element of the production culture and the ultimate efficiency of the well and reservoir management. It's not only drilling new wells. It's not only doing the walkovers. It's also tracking the pressure trends and setting the very accurate production targets for all producers by keeping bottom hole pressure as low as possible to maximize the drawdown, but not breaking the threshold beyond which the delta P is going to create the leakages and thief production from the overlaying or underlaying aquifers. So obviously the reference scenario assumes a very accurate job, 64 actions within 3 years, out of which 58 actions on increasing production and 6 actions on decreasing production. The Tonian did about the same amount of actions. The Creagenian did a little bit less. Surprisingly, a lot of the down choking down of the production, 24. As for Ordovician, they did quite a lot, but 43, but all of them were just choking up and no choking downs. That's a little bit weird. The new line, the next line is new channeling on producers. That's a nasty thing. That's how many behind casing complications have you created within the 3 synthetic years. Obviously, reference scenario assumes very accurate job on the production targets, 0 channelings on producing, 0 new channelings. There are few which they inherited from the pre-tournament times. They fixed them, but they didn't create the new one. The Tonian has created 13, while the Creagenian created 25. So probably I understand why Creagenian were doing a lot of the down choke down adjustments, 24, because they basically saw the results of the new channelings, high water cuts, and they're trying to shut them down. As for Ordovician, they were more accurate, or probably too humble with the drawdown. We're going to see this later, but they only created 8 new channelings in producers. Let's go to the next line, which is a water cut. The regular water cut, or better say a reference water cut, by the end of the 3rd synthetic year is going to be 58%, whereas the Tonian has reached 68. Creagenian is the same, and the Ordovician 76. It's weird because the Ordovician create only 8 new channelings. So why is the water cut is so high? Whether probably we will probably can understand this in a few lines later, but probably they drilled in a water area. Let's see. I cannot say from here what was the reason, but it was very sad that their water cut was 76%, and that's one of the reasons of the low recovery factor at the end of the production of the life cycle of this field. The next line is cumulative liquid production. As you can see, the recommended cumulative liquid production in 3 years is 3.2 million, while Tonian and Creagenian produced about the same amount. It's amazing. It's almost 1-to-1. Tonian and Creagenian. Yeah, it's almost the same in oil production. Can I go back to the previous slide, please, where we have a budget strategy and oil production? Yeah, from here you can see that the total production of oil is almost the same, 47.8 with Tonian and 47.9 with Creagenian. So the total oil production was almost the same. Can we go back? Yeah. So I understand the liquid production is almost just a little bit behind. The Creagenian was a little bit behind. The water cut is almost the same, 68% in both cases, just a little bit lower in liquid production. As for Ordovician, they produced more fluid, just a little bit, 2.2 against 2 million. But their water cut was quite high. That's where they lost the oil production. Let's go to the next line, which is a formation pressure per session. And what we see is that the reference recommendation was to maintain the pressure around 11,200 kPa and kilopascals. And the Tonian was quite close, to be honest with you. That's how we see the strategy in formation pressure between Tonian and Creagenian was quite different. The Tonian was closer to 11, 10.7, whilst Creagenian formation pressure was quite low, 8,000 only. So despite of the similar liquid production, the Creagenian did not maintain the pressure efficiently. With Ordovician, they managed to increase the formation pressure even above the recommendation from the reference. I'm surprised. I'm surprised because if you remember, Ordovician was not spending a budget on the injection. So how did they manage to do that? They produced more fluid than the Tonian and Cryogenium, 2.2 million. They didn't spend cash on drilling new injectors. Probably they did in conversion. We're going to see this in the next chapter. But let's continue with this chapter. So the next line is the bottom hole pressure per session. The reference was very accurate. It's supposed to be 5.888, let's say 5.9, 5,900 kPIs. The Tonian was keeping the bottom hole pressure a little bit higher. So we can say the Tonian was a little bit humble in the way they were keeping away from the critical bottom hole pressure. They could have brought bottom hole pressure a little bit lower, increase the delta P and produce even more. But who am I to say they already won the tournament? Yeah? The Cryogenian on the other side were keeping the bottom hole pressure at 5,000, which is below the critical. And obviously they created a lot of the new channels, 25. Yes, now we can see it, right? And as for Ordovician, the Ordovician were keeping very high bottom hole pressure, 8,000. That explains why they didn't create a lot of the new channelings on producers, only 8. And it also explains why did they no, it's just they should have lowered the bottom hole pressure. They should have been more brave to lower the bottom hole pressure below, at least below 7,000. And in this case, they could have easily won the tournament. But anyway, let's go to the drawdown. The recommended drawdown was 5,300. And the Tonian drawdown was the highest in the range. That explains why they produced more than anyone else. The Cryogenian drawdown was substantially lower. It's basically 30% lower, 3,000. Well, the Ordovician kept drawdown closer to the Tonian. Next one is the productivity. Next line is the productivity index. The productivity index is where we actually divide the production rate by the delta P. And the reference productivity is 0.05. It's quite high. That's basically because they were doing fracs and the other teams were not doing fracs. And the next one in line is the Ordovician 0.02, which is the most popular well productivity index among all the sections. I've been doing a lot of CASs on Alpha 5, so I just remember this number. As for Tonian and Cryogenian, if you can please change the format, if you add if you change the format, or you cannot do it. It's actually not 0, it's 0.00, it's 001. Just believe me, no, it's just 001, yes. So basically it's a little bit below 002. It's below 0.02, just a little bit. That's why it rounds up and shows a 0 here. But let's keep in mind that Ordovician showed a better productivity. Well, whether this productivity from the target formation with the all pay, or is it because they connected the aquifer? I cannot say it from here. Well, this 0.05 from a reference, it's a high productivity index, and it comes from the target pay, not from the connected reservoirs. Okay, let's go to the next chapter. Not chapter, but next section is the surveillance. Let's see what was the strategy in surveillance. The reference scenario assumed 20 formation pressure tests in 3 synthetic years. As I mentioned before, Tonian was not tracking formation pressure in producers. The Cryogenian did only one job, or the Vichin one job. Basically, none of those teams were tracking the formation pressure. The next line is the Y-line formation tests. And what we can see here is that the reference plan thought that 3 wells which have been drilled should be, the Y-line formation test should be done in all of them. The Tonian didn't do this. The Cryogenian did 2 out of the 3 wells drilled, and the Ordovician did in all of them. So basically, it's only Tonian who doesn't see a value in Y-line formation tests. As for production logs, the recommendation from the reference was to log 2 wells over 3 years, both with the borehole flow profile based on the mechanical spinner and the reservoir flow profile by adding the noise log and temperature logs. And basically, Tonian did more than this. They did 7 jobs. And the Cryogenian did the other way around. They did 7 boreholes and 2 formation. And the Ordovician did only 1 PLC and 2 borehole and 1 PLC reservoir. I would say that it's more or less okay. I'm surprised Tony and the Cryogenian did more. Not surprised, because they did create new challenges on producers. They did realize that it happened, and they did the surveillance in order to identify them and probably fix them. I think we've done with the production chapter, and we are proceeding to the last chapter, which is pressure maintenance. So on new injectors, the reference scenario assumes that the 7 new injection points should be created within 3 synthetic years. The Tonian here created 3 points, Cryogenian is only 1, and Ordovician 2 points. The reference scenario assumed that out of these 7 new injectors, 2 should be drilled and 5 should be converted. The Tonian did 1 drilling and 2 conversions. The Cryogenian just did 1 conversion, and Ordovician did 2 conversions. So my suspect that Ordovicians were mostly was mostly relying on conversions turned to be true. As for the average water injection rates, well, basically those wells which had been drilled, the reference was 216, and Tonian, the only team which drilled new injectors, was maintaining 150, a little bit low, but not that far. It's more or less good. In next line injection water shutoffs, the reference scenario assumed 8 water shutoffs because they identified 8 wells from the pre-tournament period which had issues with injection behind the casing. And it's been already captured by PLT, so they just went and fixed them. As for Tonian, Cryogenian, Ordovician, none of this team spent much care about fixing the thief water injection, unfortunately. On injection conversions, we already discussed this over. Let's go to the next line. Injection perforations. Well, basically, reference didn't see big opportunity, just 1 element, not efficient. Tonian, Cryogenian, Ordovician didn't do this. I'm not happy to see zeros because, in my view, the teams should be experimenting with the perforations. They should be doing some exercises. Not much, because in this particular case, it's not efficient. In some other case, it may become efficient. But if I see zeros, I see that the teams is not even trying to exploit this opportunity, to explore and then exploit this opportunity. The next line is injectors stimulations. Again, for reference scenario is just 1, and that's because this case is not responsive. The reservoir itself in this case is not responsive. Unfortunately, Tonian and Cryogenian did not even try, but Ardovicians did a fair work to explore this opportunity. Next line is injection adjustment. This one is almost as important as the production adjustment in the previous chapter. And the reference scenario suggests 30 actions over the 3 years, with the 7 actions in increasing injection and 13 actions in the decreasing injection. And the Tonian did 30 actions, but all of them up. The Cryogenian did not care about the adjustment of the injections at all, which is very sad. And the Ordovician did 38 and all of them up, similar to what Tonian did. Again, I mean, all 3 teams should probably put more care into the adjustments of injection, especially in terms of downsizing injection, in order to prevent the excessive water leakages in aquifer. New channeling on injectors. Well, Tonian and Cryogenians only created 1, but Ardovician created 4. The next one is cumulative water injection. Cumulatives turned to be fair for Ordovician, but Tonian and Cryogenian injected less, especially Cryogenian, 2.5. Now we can understand why the formation pressure in Cryogenian was quite low. They didn't inject much, and they didn't make a lot of adjustments on the production, on the injection targets. The next metric is the production injection ratio, which means basically how much oil you produce per every volume injected. It's volume over volume. And the reference scenario suggests that it's been producing 0.35 barrels of oil per every barrel injected water. With Tonian, it's 0.2. It's a little bit less. With Cryogenian, it's a little bit high. It's a little bit more efficient because we basically were injecting less. And the Ordovician is quite low. So the injection was inefficient. They injected as much as the reference, but inefficiently. Quite a lot went just away from the old pay. The next metric is the repressurizing injection ratio, which shows what was the formation pressure variation in production wells per every barrel of water injection. So unlike the previous metrics, it doesn't show the sweep efficiency or displacement efficiency, but more or less showing energetic efficiency. And the reference scenario was showing 0.62 kilopascal increase of formation pressure in production wells per every 1,000 of cubes, water cubes injected. The Tonian has shown half of this efficiency. It was increasing the formation pressure, but less efficiently. So let's say half of the injected water went missing. The Cryogenian was showing the negative efficiency. So it was overall insufficient and probably a lot of missing. And the Ordovician showed the best performance in terms of the repressurizing injection ratio. It means, yes, they created some behind casing channelings. They lost probably some water outside, but the water they placed in the places where they put that water went quite efficiently to increase the pressure in production wells. So they probably brought the injection closer to producers comparing to the other companies, teams, sorry, and even comparing to the reference. In terms of the next line is the cumulative voidage replacement ratio. The reference strategy was to keep 114% of the cumulative replacement pressure at the sand face level. The Tonian was keeping that number higher than it's needed. The Ordovician is also high, 160%, 166%. But again, that's because a part of that water was missing. And the Cryogenian was keeping 123, which looks fair compared to reference, but we understand that a part of the water were missing. So the reference 114%, it means that all water in reference was going into the pay formation, oil pay formation. None of this was missing. And still, they had to exceed 100% because some energy is being dispersed in the aquifer around oil pay. But if you also inject above and below the oil pay, then in this case, your VRR should be much higher. And that's what happened with the Tonian Ordovician, but it didn't happen with the Cryogenian. So let's look at the injection formation pressure per session. What we see here is that the formation pressure in reference case is going to be 18,000, and Ordovician came quite close, and kudos for efficient energy efficiency in Ordovician. Obviously, Cryogenian has lost the formation pressure in injectors and in producers, and the Tonian came to around 14.5, which is still, I would say, quite below what was recommended by reference. The next line is the bottom hole pressure. Again, the reference was keeping the bottom hole pressure at 23,000 and not higher. Otherwise, it can break thief injection. It can break the cement. Well, and in this case, we see that Tonian was doing a good job, 17,000. Not far from what was recommended by reference. Cryogenian was quite low, probably 60% what was recommended. And Ordovician kept the best bottom hole pressure of all, 21,000. It's almost as good as the reference. So it was the best strategy to maintain the injection targets. What was the injection drawdown? The reference drawdown was 4,700. The Tonian drawdown was quite low, 2.8. The Cryogenian was even lower, but the Ordovician again 3,500. It's a little bit lower than reference, but quite good. So I would say the Ordovician did a good job. The next line is the injector's injectivity per session. Again, reference showing 0.05 and Ordovician showing 0.07, which is quite high. Well, Tonian and Cryogenian show a very low injectivity, below something around 0.01. That's why it doesn't show an excess pressure. And the next line is the surveillance. Well test formation pressure test. Basically, nobody was doing formation tests. And if you go to the next line, because nobody drilled the new injectors. Oh no, the Tonian did one injector, but they didn't do the wireline formation tests. Unfortunately. The next line is the PLT borehole. It's more or less fair, except Cryogenian. Cryogenian did not care to survey the injectors at all. And as for the other Tonian and Ordovician, they did a fair job. Well, obviously, this is a public session, and this is a demo session. Not all the functionality has been enabled, and only 3 shots. And the proper PetroCup well and reservoir management session takes 5 shots, minimum 1 day. Sometimes around 2 day sessions on 7 shots or 10 shots. So it's more of a 1 full day or 2 day session, and it does require the full team to multidisciplinary team to perform. I can understand if those teams, they didn't have enough surveillance people to help them to identify the candidates for the surveillance, to interpret the information from the surveillance, to pass this message to the team members. And obviously, the overall results, 52%, was rather good, to be honest with you. If you go back to the production chapter, the green one, if we go back to the cumulative oil production on new wells and cumulative oil production on old wells. So if you would like to understand why Tonia, although relatively good, why did they get only 52% of the net profit, net present value? So or similar number in terms of the oil production. You can see that they basically fell short on the new wells. And very unlucky, because the production from the new wells, the initial production new wells, was pretty much good. Can you go to the upper line, please? The next line up. The total initial oil production on new wells drilled was 40. It's the same as reference. It's just inability to maintain the production from the new wells by maintaining the pressure, but maintaining the proper bottom hole pressure. It did allow them to produce the same amount as the reference, 413. And the same I can say on the old wells. The production from the old wells was not very efficient. If you look at the cumulative liquid production on the Tonian, which is 1,900, it's 40% less than that reference, which is 3.2. Can you please select the rows cumulative liquid production? Yes. So they didn't produce enough fluid. Same for cryogenian, they didn't produce enough fluid. Plus their water cut was higher. And the main issue with Ordovician, they did a great job in pressure maintenance, to be honest with you, much better than Tonian and cryogenian. But definitely they did produce more fluid than cumulative, but their water cut was very high, 77%. Unfortunately, this type of analysis does not help to understand where exactly they've been producing that water. They did make more channelings of producers than other teams. They did only 8 comparing 13, 25. So probably it was coming from the new wells. So if they were drilling new wells with a lot of water, that may explain the high water cut, and finally can explain why, despite of the good pressure maintenance, and a good liquid production, they failed to produce the proper amount of oil, and they failed in final recovery. If there is a chance to run the activity by activity analysis for the Ordovician team, and that will be much more detailed analysis for this specific team than consolidated activity statistics, then it is possible to see from the profile, from the production profile, from exactly where the high water cut is coming from. With this in mind, I would like to finish my debriefing session. Say thank you to all 3 teams participating in that tournament, and I really hope to see you guys participating in the proper, fully fledged PetroCup sessions. It's easy to do if you go to the session calendar, guys. If you go to the session calendar, oops, takes time. And you can click whatever date is available to the right, click any date. Yeah, what you need to do is just to get the voucher, put your email, book the session, and run it proper. Well, thank you very much. See you.